As someone that's been obese for the majority of my life, I've looked for many ways to shed my fat away throughout the years. I've tried everything from weightlifting and cardio and eating cleaner, and honestly those are just the best ways to lose some fat like how I did. And after playing Osu for the last 3 years or so, I've always wondered if can Osu actually help you burn some calories to lose some weight? You see people FC maps a game PP and see their heart rate skyrocket into levels of the BPM of the song, and it really makes you wonder if Osu is like a cardio method to help you lose some pounds while you're sitting down. In this video, I plan to explore my methodology for how I plan to calculate how much calories you burn from playing Osu. To measure the actual caloric burn of me playing Osu to my experimental method, I plan to use a Samsung Galaxy watch and will measure my caloric burn for like 30 minutes of me just doing nothing, and then like 30 minutes of me playing Osu with my Samsung Galaxy watch and like a bunch of categories of skill sets, and that caloric difference will be the actual amount of calories that are burned. But I'm also going to do some engineering math stuff because I want to see the actual caloric part of tapping and aiming instead of the addition of heart rate from the Samsung Galaxy watch calorie measurer. But anyways, we got to consider first what happens when we actually play Osu. When we play Osu, we mainly have 2 inputs. Well, technically 3, but the third one of reading with your eyes and brain are hard to measure caloric output, and honestly it might just be negligible. But the other 2 are tapping on a keyboard with your fingers and aiming with a tablet or mouse with your hand. For the sake of this video, my caloric burn experiment is optimized for my setup, where I use a CTL4722 tablet while hovering and utilize a wooting keypad for my keyboard, otherwise known as an wooting keypad. It's cringe to say that, but that's what it is. So with these 2 inputs in mind, let's start with how I'm going to measure the wooting keypad caloric output. So in Newtonian physics, we can calculate caloric output due to usage of the work equation, which is equal to force times distance. With this equation, we can convert the final output into calories by dividing by 4.178, as the work equation in standard units was given output in joules. And in this work equation, this distance would be the travel lane of the actuation point inside the keyboard, and the force is going to be the force exerted by your finger to actually tap. But to first plug our stuff into the work equation, we need to look at how the wooting actually works. So the wooting keypad is unique where it has a function called rapid trigger. Usually with non-rapid trigger keyboards, the exerted effort with your finger onto the keypad is when the actuation of the keyboard goes all the way down, and then when the actuation goes all the way up. In terms of exerted force, the main thing here is the journey of the actuation point all the way down. In other words, most keyboards will activate a key on the computer when the keypad is fully pressed down onto the actuation point. But what's different about the wooting is that it actually has something called rapid trigger. And what rapid trigger does is that after you do an initial press with the finger to the max actuation point you set on Wootility, which is 0.4 millimeters for me, the journey of the key when it's going back up can actually allow you to press again within a certain threshold you set in Wootility. In my settings, my threshold for how much distance the key travels back up before you can press it again to register another stroke is 0.2 millimeters, which is about half the actuation point. Once the stroke has traveled up 0.2 millimeters, you can register another stroke depending on an additional press distance you can customize in Wootility. I have it set at 0.15 millimeters, so the key would need to travel at least 0.15 millimeters after its release point is 0.2 millimeters in order to register another keystroke. I know it might sound kind of confusing because it's super confusing for me to understand at first, but just the basic gist of it is that while the wooting keyboard, the actual key is actually going all the way back up in the journey, you can press again within that journey to register another tap, so you don't have to wait for the key to actually go all the way back up, which allows you to register a lot more keys per second. It's probably infinite potential. Anyways, why do we care about this? Well, we need the distance traveled of the key in order to find the force for our work equation. So in Newtonian physics, there's a theory of impulse momentum where basically a change in momentum is equal to force exerted times the time span of the impulse momentum event. We want to use this theory for the keypad because it describes an impulse momentum event where we tap a key and then the key goes back up. There's some equation derivations through my notes here. We can find that the force is equal to mass times delta V divided by delta T. Then we substitute delta V for delta X over delta T because that's just calculus. Then we sub that back into the force equation, which turns it into massive key times delta X over delta T squared. There's also just another way to write Newton's second law where you just do F equals ma, as acceleration in this case is literally just delta X over delta T squared, but whatever, I just did it because this way it kind of made sense. But anyways, that's our force right there, and we can use it to calculate our work. And work is essentially going to be an integral of a force over distance graph. So distance here is going to be a cumulative distance traveled of the key while it is being pressed, so that's just going to equal the sigma of delta X. Okay, but now we got a big problem with this equation. So our final equation for wooting is work equals massive keycap times delta X over delta T squared, and then that thing times sigma of delta X sigma is basically the accumulation of delta x, and mass is basically the mass of the key. But the issue is here, how do we measure delta x and delta t? Respectively, that's the distance that the key travels during the tap, and the delta t is the time it takes to actually perform that tap. Honestly, I couldn't be bothered to write some code or to get some equipment to measure that shit out, so I just approximated the shit like a proper engineer. So when we look at our parameters of distance before on our utility, we saw that actuation point is to actually measure a key is first at 0.4 millimeters. Then it's 0.15 millimeters when you want to tap it in rapid trigger mode. So to approximate delta x, I literally just averaged that number and added the initial actuation point with the rapid trigger actuation point and divided them by 2, which is not a horrible approximation, but this approximation assumes that we're in rapid trigger and we're not in rapid trigger like halfway. It's like half. We tap with full force and half we tap with rapid trigger. And this approximation is only going to get worse on maps where we play a lot of speed and we actually do activate rapid trigger a lot, but I don't know, man. I'm just trying to get this video done because I've been procrastinating for a month. So what about delta t? Well, that's gonna be easy to get, or I just use digital hypno's keystroke tutorial thingy-majig where it like shows you like how many keys you tap in like a session, and I just found that total amount of keys and added them up, and I can use that tutorial thing to find the total amount of keys that I tapped within the play session. And to get this delta t, I just divided the play session length in seconds over the amount of keys I tap for each session, and that'll be the time it takes to tap one key on the wooting. To make sure there's as little error as possible, I played maps continuously within the session like as fast as I could in order to make the error of delta t not as much. So that's basically my approach to calculate caloric output for tapping, and I know it's a lot of math yap and probably didn't make a lot of sense for some people, but just bear with me if you want the numbers. I'm just trying to explain like what I did here. Also, another thing about this tapping equation is that it doesn't really account for muscle strain for when you're playing death streams or things that cause muscle soreness in your left hand, like maps where you gotta play a bunch of notes in a row. And that effect of like getting soreness is due to the lactic acid buildup from your fingers and forearms. And this muscle strain that happens when you're doing death streams on like OSU, like in the biochemical level, that pain is due to the lactic acid buildup in your muscles when you're like burning through all your glycogen stores. And like when you burn through your glycogen stores, it does like a process called glycolysis, which turns glycogen into glucose, and then that turns to ATP, and that ATP can be used as energy so you can actually tap, and you're basically depleting that while you're doing streams. But the thing is that I don't even know how to numerically measure that muscle strain with like a biochemistry. Like, I'm not a fucking chemist, bro. I'm a fucking engineer, so I don't even know what the fuck this is. So I just want to acknowledge that there's an effect that's happening when you're like doing muscle strain on streams like that, and there's probably some caloric output there in terms of like the chemical reaction, but I don't know how to measure that, man. I ain't gonna lie. But now we got the other inputs. Aiming. Well, aiming is actually going to be a little easier, but still kind of hard. So I'm just going to do analysis of me holding my pen over my tablet, and luckily for me, I can simplify our force summations because I hover like 98% of the time while I play, so I can basically assume that friction is not a thing when I'm using my pen. But basically, I made a free body diagram of my epic drawing of my hand and my pen over a thing, and just did force summations to find my force for the work equation. So we live in a three-dimensional world, and to hold my pen up in the upwards direction of the Z direction to hover, I basically have to hold the weight of the pen in my hands. So I just get the weights of those and times them by gravity in order to get my force in the Z direction. But what about when we actually hold our pen and move it in like the X and Y direction? Well, I noticed that when I move my hand to rotate around my wrist, my forearm flexes, which means my forearm muscles are doing work to move my hand. But measuring that in its components might be challenging, so I just said that Fx and Fy, the resultant of those forces, are just equal to tension in my forearm muscle. But then how do we actually measure this tension? Well, I just want to bring it back a bit, guys. So I just want to admit that I kind of fucked up here. So I was initially going to do a torque balance of my arm and hand with the tablet and stuff like that in order to get the tension. But later when I was doing my calculations for the aiming calories, I got stuff like 900 calories per hour, which is absurd. So I looked back at my equations and found a pretty big error. So my initial equation for my aiming was going to be work equals mass of pen plus mass of hand times G times 1 plus length between center of mass of my hand and pen and my hand joint divided by the length between hand joint and elbow joint, and then that whole thing just times by the distance traveled of my cursor on my screen. But there was a big issue here. So I'm going to calculate my distance traveled on my cursor on my screen using this handy dandy program I found, which tracks your cursor movement on the screen and gives you cumulative distance. And I'll do a bunch of conversions so that it would actually match how much my pen moves in real life, as my area is not equal to surface area of my monitor screen. However, our previous work equation says that all the conjunctions of my entire arms and hands are moving the large distance that my cursor travels on the screen, which is just not realistic. So I changed up the work equation to a more accurate version where I converted that force as being moved into the conical part of the pen, which is essentially the pen nib area. And to get that force, I'll just need to get the weight of that area. So I just weighed my pen to find the total area, then did volume calculations onto the cylindrical part of the pen, which is the handle that you hold, and the conical part of the pen, which is the pen nib. Then I just divided that conical volume by the total volume of the pen and multiplied that by the mass of the pen in order to get the mass of the conical part of the pen. And then I multiplied that mass by gravity in order to get the weight that is being moved. And then I times that by my cumulative distance I calculated from the program to get my work. I know that's a lot, but this essentially gives me the work that is being done to move pen nib part of the pen, as that'll be more accurate in terms of the cursor movement on the screen. But there's probably still a lot of error in this overall caloric output, as the distance traveled is not really evenly distributed throughout the conical volume. Okay, so that gives us a pretty basic caloric output equation for aiming, but a pretty big issue here with this aiming caloric output equation is that it doesn't account for the work done by my forearms to hold up my hand and pen for a hover player like me. So I can easily calculate the force that is being supported by my forearm by just multiplying the weight of my hand and my pen times the gravity constant. But the thing is that I can't really use the work equation here, since my hand and my pen are static, like they're not moving. Like work needs a distance, but there is no distance being moved. I'm just holding it. So I tried asking ChatGPT on how you would do caloric output for a static system like this, and he just yapped about some stuff about estimating BMR and stuff like, I don't even know, man. But he gave me an interesting idea where this case where you're just holding your pen up with your arm, it would be a case where the forearm is under constant muscle contraction, which means that your forearm is constantly under tension the whole time it is holding the pen. And apparently I did some more research, and this falls under a concept called isometric contraction, where it's something that happens when you support a weight with one of your muscles for an extended period of time but you don't move. So like you can like hold a dumbbell up in the air but you just don't move, and it's kind of like a stamina exercise. So if we can't use work since nothing's moving, then the only energy output that can be explained here is, again, as we said earlier, the breakdown of the glycogen stores in our muscles, converting them into ATP, which are then used to keep your muscles in contraction. And that would be the source of the energy expenditure. But the thing is that I don't fucking know how I'm supposed to calculate that numerically, man. I'm not a freaking biology guy. Like, I can't believe this, man. Like, I don't even know how you're supposed to measure that stuff. Like, I think I remember trying to do some in chemistry on how to do that shit, but like, dude, I don't know, bruh. But anyways, I did some more research and ended up at this Pubmed article, which gives some numbers here and there for ATP breakdown in your muscles when doing isometric contractions. But the numbers given in the article for units for how fast a biochemical reaction is happening in terms of millimoles per minute. And in this article, it seems that the range of this reaction rate is from 70 to 140 millimoles per minute for isometric contractions for various activities. And I'm assuming that the various activities are for like actual exercises, like holding up a dumbbell up with your hand up in the air, instead of someone just playing Osu pen over a tablet. So I don't really know. I tried to ask ChatGPT on how I could convert this millimoles per minute number into some energy expenditure equations, but ChatGPT basically said that I'll need to describe a bunch of shit, like describing the type of biochemical reaction that's happening, which is basically cellular respiration and the mitochondria, in order to break ATP for energy to hold our pen up. And that kid also says some stuff like I gotta do some electron transfer chain, some ATP synthase, and some other bullcrap. Like, I don't even know what this kid is yapping about, man. Like, my brain is spinning already. So I'm just gonna estimate that this energy expenditure to hold my pen up is probably a few calories an hour at max. I don't really know, man, but that's just my estimation, just like based off an educated guess. Okay, but in summary, we have our work equations to calculate tapping on the keypad and aiming with our pen as shown here on the screen. Now, we just need to actually collect data, which is the next part of this video. So I was originally going to measure caloric output just for a single 1 hour OC session, but I kind of realized that wouldn't be a good idea since I would be playing a bunch of different skill sets and stuff. So I just had it so I played 30 minutes of each skill set, of which I define as low BPM jumps, high BPM jumps, alt, tech, streams, and speed. I basically just streamed this on Twitch and just played those maps for my collections on Osu. And honestly, I could have picked maps better by picking like maps from Eternity Pool or something that more accurately reflect those skill sets, but I don't know, I think the maps I picked were pretty decent. But I just want to say some general things for each category, where each category would all be a no mod to remove confounding variables from different reading caloric outputs from playing hidden or hard rock or DT. Also measured the tapping count and tracked the meters of my program I downloaded for each map, and also calculated the actual caloric output with my Samsung Galaxy Watch for each map. But now I'm just going to quickly go over each skill set and my overall results for them. So starting with the low BPM jumps, this skill set would be defined by jumps with just a bunch of aim and jumps like Sotark's maps and stuff like that. The low BPM jumps will be defined as maps that are below 240 BPM. Now to go over my results here, my average star rating I played in this section was about 7.23 stars, my T count was 1029, my U count was 8135, which gives me a total tap count of 9164 for an 1851 second session. Plugging some numbers in, I get 0.202 seconds to tap once on the keyboard, which makes my calculated total caloric burn for the session to be 0.0000054,132 calories, which is not a lot. Then I got the track meters of 1341.2 and converted that over from my tablet area, which I'll just show you guys the math real quick in this Excel sheet, where I basically got a ratio of my tablet dimensions and divided that by the dimensions of my monitor screen, which gave me a conversion ratio of how much smaller my tablet area is compared to my monitor screen. Then I averaged that conversion ratio from both the height and width of the areas and converted that track meters to an actual meters traveled by my pen tablet by multiplying that track meters by my new conversion factor. This basically gives me 167.7 meters for my actual meters traveled, which gives me a whopping 0.478 calories burned from aiming. Combining my tapping and my aiming calories, I get 0.47 calories burned for the session, which gives me a whopping 0.9290 calories per hour from playing low BPM normal jumps. That is not a lot. I then use my watch to calculate my actual caloric burn by minusing the caloric burn for that session by the caloric burn from me just existing from watching One Piece earlier, and it gives me a caloric per hour of 79.74 for that 30-minute session. So I just want to say that my caloric calculated burn made a lot of assumptions and is most likely not super accurate, as I did not account for the biochemical energy expenditure, the muscle strain, and holding up a tablet pen, because honest to God, I have no idea how to calculate that stuff. I already said that, but I just have no idea. But let's move on to the high BPM jumps data. So this skill set would be defined as jumps that are above 240 BPM. My average star rating was 7.89 stars, and honest to God, it's getting repetitive, like just yapping about all this stuff. So I'm gonna show you guys the rest of the columns right here if you want to pause and look at those numbers. But for something new, I'll just say that high BPM jumps are jumps that are above 240 BPM. Alt is basically normal 3 type of maps. Tech is just a bunch of slider maps. Streams are basically maps that are below 240 BPM in our streams, and speed are for shred maps above 240 BPM. But anyways, looking at our data here, it looks super screwed up, and I made some plots on MATLAB to compare the caloric burns to each other. And when we look at the plots right here, the watch calories are just absolutely dominating the actual mechanical burn from playing Osu. If we look at our data even more here, it seems that my total calculated burn that is the highest is surprisingly low BPM jumps. Lowest caloric output was from streams, which is also pretty weird. I initially thought that I would burn the most calories from playing speed, but that is just not the case. And I also want to give these sources of errors where this discrepancy could be because my muscles are just more efficient at playing stream than speed, in terms of the watch calories, but that doesn't even matter for my work equations since they don't account for muscle efficiency. But in terms of the caloric output from my watch, I burned a whopping 2 calories for playing streams for 30 minutes, while I burned 91 calories when playing alt for 30 minutes-ish. Why is this the case? Well, let me explain. So I played these categories consecutively from each other, and I initially just got back from the gym before I started playing Osu, so my resting heart rate and metabolism is increased at first. The Samsung Galaxy Watch mainly measures your caloric output based off your heart rate, so those higher caloric numbers at the first 90 minutes of the sessions are most likely due to that increased heart rate, which means I need to breathe in more oxygen, which is just going to be a lot more like caloric output. And also just hopped on Osu and it had a novelty effect, where if I'm hitting anything remotely crazy at first in the session, then I get an increased heart rate because I think it's cool. But later on in the session, I just stop giving a fuck and don't get an increased heart rate. And I'm just chillington and I'm just don't really care. So my heart rate is just really stagnant towards the end. And also midway through my session, my red light filter on my computer screen turned on, which reduces blue light from my monitor, which reduces cortisol in my body, which reduces my heart rate. So also, it was approaching nighttime and it was approaching my natural bedtime, so my body was just naturally reducing cortisol and increasing melatonin to prepare for sleep, so my heart rate was decreasing as well from that. Well, that would definitely explain the large discrepancies here, where it was just from heart rate, and my calculated total caloric burn from playing Osu doesn't really factor that much into the watch's Also, I'm just not as comfortable on playing jumps compared to streams, so that lack of comfort could contribute to my increased heart rate. So what is the moral story right here looking at our data? Well, it seems that if you want to burn the most calories playing Osu, you should probably try to get your heart rate as high as possible and perhaps play jumps and maybe play a lot of maps of totals of jumps and streams together, since that would be the most caloric output just from a mechanical perspective. But let's get our head out the gutter for a second. I don't think anyone's surprised. Osu is not a good way to burn calories. I mean, you're basically burning a few calories per hour at max from playing Osu. If you really want to burn some calories and lose some weight, go take a walk or hit the gym, man. Like, Osu is not really a good way to burn calories, I can see here from my data. But if you really want to use Osu as a caloric burner, just go FC a ton of maps in a session so that your heart rate is super high, because the oxygen uptake would lead to increased caloric output compared to mechanical effort of your fingers and hands to move the Osu stuff. And it's pretty evident from my watch here, like assuming that my watch is accurate, that like just having a higher heart rate is just gonna lead to you burning more calories. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed watching this goofy ass video. I've been yapping about this stuff for like a while now, and I'm honestly questioning now why the fuck I even made this video in the first place. Like, I'm having my day off from work and I'm just like, well, let's go fucking make an Osu video about math and shit. I don't know, dude. I'm just this video is so stupid, bro. Like, I don't know. But thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you guys in the next one, I guess. So yeah.